Adventure Time is, without a doubt, one of the most popular and beloved animated series of all time, and follows Finn and Jake on their adventures throughout the post-apocalyptic land of Ooo. He stuck with us for 8 years with his 10 seasons, and the duo of Jake the dog and Finn the human is now considered one of the best friendships in animation. That is why it did not seem strange to us that the series would make a comeback in 2020 with Distant Lands, a special consisting of 4 extra long episodes that would take us back to you. But there were things we didn't expect. Oh, by the way, major spoilers about Jake's life in this video, obviously. Turns out that in the second episode of Distant Lands, titled Obsidian, a 30-year-old character named Finn makes a brief appearance, showcasing a tattoo of Jake's face encircled by flowers, while the whereabouts of Jake remain unseen. And well, the third episode, Together Once More, directly deals with Finn's journey through the underworld and the 50 worlds of the deceased. After his death many years later, her adventure this time is to find Jake so she can see him again after being separated for so many years. Here they could have easily told us that Jake died of old age years after the series, surrounded by his children, but in reality, the episode decides to be very weird with Jake's death. Finn behaves as if Jake abandoned him, and he makes a choice to assume an attractive youthful physical appearance in order to be easily identifiable to him. But, despite having died twice already throughout Adventure Time, Jake was alive at the end of the series. What happened? This is one of Adventure Time's biggest mysteries. In this video, we'll solve it in Lugia by watching all 283 episodes and the 4 hours of Distant Lands, analyzing every tiny detail around our beloved ultra-stretchy magical yellow dog. Join us as we uncover the truth behind this enigmatic storyline. And debunking too the popular story of the non-canonical comic by Steve Wolfhard. Before we start discussing the clues and half-truths that Distant Lands leaves us, we need to talk about other instances of Jake's death being mentioned. Because, believe it or not, it's a topic that is talked about a lot throughout the series, starting off with a downright creepy death dream that Jake has in the episode of The New Frontier. This episode is pretty intense, even by Adventure Time standards, because it shows us for the first time how each of the characters deals with the prospect of imminent death, specifically Jake's death. The episode starts with Jake having a prophetic dream about a spaceship and the Banana Man in space. In the dream, Jake runs out of air and is about to die when he sees the Cosmic Owl, who wakes him. You see, in Adventure Time, whenever the Cosmic Owl appears in a dream, it turns out to be a prophetic dream, so Jake automatically concludes that it's his death dream and that his end is near. Just as she wakes up and tells Finn about the dream, the Banana Man knocks on the door. Finn hides Jake, and for the rest of the episode we can see a weird dynamic between the two. Finn obviously doesn't want Jake to die, and he does everything he can to prevent the dream from happening. But Jake accepts his fate with peace and tranquility, even going to the extreme of helping to make the events that would lead to his potential death happen. Brass, both of them follow the Banana Man to his house, and Finn almost kills him with a crossbow just so Jake's dream doesn't come true, while Jake tries to get on a rocket they find behind the Banana Man's house to fulfill his destiny. The rocket fails to take off, and instead opens up a gigantic hole in the ground, where Finn, Jake, and the Banana Man fall straight into an underground lake. This lake recreates Jake's dream, with the only difference being that Finn is there, so Jake doesn't die. The Banana Man explains that he only went to ask them for sugar, and Jake says that maybe his dream wasn't real, unless he didn't die because Finn was with him and he probably will die when Finn is not there. The episode ends with Finn chasing after Jake so that his death dream never comes true. The curious thing here is that, as I already mentioned, Jake died twice in other episodes. In Ghost Moscow, BMO gives Jake a heart attack. At the end, the Princess Doctor and Nurse Pastorillo revive Jake using electric shocks. And the second one in Sons of Mars, where by accident Abraham Lincoln ends up hitting Jake with the payment wand, which sends him straight to the 37th world of the dead. Yes, as absurd as it sounds, and Jake ends up being saved by Abraham Lincoln, who trades his immortality for Jake's life. Yes, as absurd as it sounds. Obviously none of these situations resembled the prophetic dream, so some still thought that the prophecy could end up showing Jake's true death after the events of the series. But what is usually forgotten is that the prophecy was already fulfilled in the episode The Comet. After entering the stolen Orgolorg rocket intended for his escape from Earth, Finn and Jake find themselves in space. They have a conversation with the enormous final form of the ancient beast, who then propels them into the emptiness of space to prevent them from stopping his absorption of the Catalyst comet. Finn and Jake split up because they can't control their paths in space, and Finn says Jake will fulfill his prophetic dream after all, seeing him floating off into nothingness. After being saved by Martin, it's worth mentioning that Finn starts crying because he's thinking about Jake. In the episode of The New Frontier, Finn mentions that he only cries when someone dies, and it's something that sadly we'll see a lot in this video. This time, it turns out that Banana Man had rescued Jake with his repaired rocket, just before Jake died of suffocation, which means that the dream prophesied that he would be saved by Banana Man, and not that he would die, as Jake initially thought. As we can see, Jake seems to have a very zen acceptance of his own mortality, while Finn categorically refuses to lose his brother, even if it's evident that Jake is aging faster than him. And this dynamic, repeated throughout the series, we see it again in the opening sequence of Together Again. You see, this special episode begins with a dream or hallucination that the elderly man experiences, which is caused by a parasite that supposedly replicates the happiest moments of the person it infects, while nourishing itself from the host. This is the closest thing we have to an explanation of how Jake died, but since it's a dream full of symbolism, we have to interpret it correctly. The hallucination starts with Finn and Jake in their second season appearance, stealing a 50-flavor ice cream from an ice cream mine, running away from ice cream monsters, later fighting snow golems and encountering the Ice King, who is kidnapping Princess Bubblegum and Princess Turtle, putting them both on a cauldron filled with boiling ice, so Finn and Jake can only save one. Knowing that parasites feed on your happiest experiences, it's pretty curious that this is what they show us. It means that the moment in life that Finn misses the most is his childhood, around the age of 13, when he had simpler adventures and only had to smack the Ice King a couple of times and save the princesses, with the help of his brother. He hadn't lost his arm yet, nor had it broken his heart, nor discovered his father as a coward who shirks his responsibilities, nor had to deal with all the traumas life brought him afterwards. The hallucination takes a dramatic turn when Jake is frozen by the Ice King and Finn can't free him from the ice. Oddly enough, it also occurred in the early episodes of the series in the third episode, except Jake was liberated from the ice by the princesses. Continuing the hallucination, Finn manages to save both princesses, but we notice that something is very wrong, because Jake tells him very cheerfully that everyone is alive, and suddenly tears start running down Finn's face, without him knowing why. The Turtle Princess tells them they must save the library, attacked by giant worms, but Finn is the only one who wants to keep adventuring. Everyone's leaving him, princesses, the Ice King, and even Jake say he has to go, but Finn refuses and takes him in a cart. They arrive at the library and Finn smacks all the worms using Jake, hurting him. The last worm is carried by a giant bird. Asks Finn and Jake to save him and Finn grabs onto him, carrying Jake by one foot. He says not to worry, that Finn's got it. Jake sighs, clearly tired. He doesn't want to take any more risks. The bird takes them to its nest, which contains the bodies of Abracadaniel, Dirty Beer, Mr. Pig, Meemaw, Sour Lemon, and the snail, along with their chicks, all of them dead for a long time. Jake accepts the nature of the matter, stating, the guys have to eat, but Finn does not accept it, and bites the bird's legs, which frees him on the ground. Finn is excited because they're finally getting ice cream, and Jake is staring at a tombstone. Here is where the illusion starts to shatter finally, as Jake crawls towards the grave and tells him it's okay, that's where he should be. Finn declines while Jake acknowledges his demise, transforming into water and moistening the grave. Upon viewing the entire episode, it is likely that you will recognize the clear symbolism of the 50-flavor ice cream as a representation of death. In the underworld, there are 50 different death worlds, and right when the episode starts, even Jake says that it's such a good ice cream that you have to put a little dirt on top to enjoy it. You know, like when they bury you after you die. So it turns out that when Finn finds Jake later, he discovers that he entered the 50th world because he reached enlightenment and didn't want anything anymore. His indifference, thanks to his state of nirvana, hurts Finn, who tells him that they were supposed to die together and be reborn together, like brothers, forever. That's why Finn feels abandoned, and that's why Jake's attitude to the 50-flavor ice cream in the hallucination makes sense. When Jake gets frozen, he tells Finn that he's gotta go, and that they'll meet up later to grab some ice cream together, maybe explore those 50 worlds down the line. And even though Jake's time is up, Finn still has a lot ahead of him. But Finn refuses. He takes Jake along to continue their adventures, even when the Ice King and the princesses abandon them, and he even uses Jake to beat up the worms, hurting him in the process. Finn wanted to move on with his life as if nothing happened, so everyone around him left that stage, and Jake couldn't continue. He was exhausted. Then the bird picks them up, which obviously is another metaphor for death, and although Jake accepts that they will be food for the chicks, Finn refuses again. Now Finn thinks they'll be able to try the ice cream together, which has a pretty depressing undertone, because it probably refers to Finn offering to die with Jake. But Jake crawls to his grave and melts along with the ice and the contents of the ice cream. Jake dies, leaving Finn behind. All of this seems to point to Jake dying of old age, but as I mentioned at the beginning, Finn's obsidian tattoo and the fact that he took on a young appearance for Jake to recognize him indicate that Jake actually died just a few years after the end of the series. Which is quite problematic, because in dog years, Jake should be approximately 45 years old the last time we saw him, and he was in a fairly healthy condition. Jake died when Finn was young, confirmed by the intro of the final episode in the series last season. In this intro, set in the distant future, we see many curious things, including remains of statues of Finn and Jake as they look towards the end of the series, or at least that's their initial appearance. If we pay attention, we will see the foundation rock of these statues. Instead of saying Finn and Jake, he says Finn and Jer, with the last name cut off. Clearly, it is the brother of Jermaine, Jake, and Finn, indicating that the statues depict Finn and Jermaine, with Finn appearing youthful. Which implies that Finn and Jermaine carried on their adventures in the future, even while Finn appeared youthful, and after Jake's demise, indicating that Jake must have passed away shortly after the conclusion of Adventure Time, for Jermaine to assume his role. This, on the other hand, debunks the most popular theory about Jake's death, which comes from a little comic made by one of the writers, Steve Wolfhard, and posted on Twitter. You see, 2 years before the release of Together Again, Adventure Time received an Emmy nomination for its finale. Celebrating this, Wolfhard shared an idea that he would have loved to use during the series for Jake's death. In this comic, we see how Jake dies of old age, and during the funeral, his body expands in an exaggerated way, destroying the Candy Kingdom and the funeral venue. The Sweet Princess drags Jake's body to the edge of the gigantic Earth crater, and her yellow mass ends up creating a new continent and restoring the world to its natural shape. They said he was semi-canonical and a bunch of stuff like that, but there's a little detail that nobody mentions, and Finn died before Jake in this comic. On the first page we see that Jake has a cane with Finn's face on it, probably made in his honor. At the funeral, only immortal characters or those with a ridiculously long lifespan, like Vimo, Marceline, Princess Bubblegum, Candy Kingdom inhabitants, Jake's descendants, and Sweet Pea, who's already quite old, are present. However, Finn is not present anywhere, and he would not fail to attend Jake's funeral, unless of course he was deceased. So obviously this never happened. Not in the official history did Jake die when Finn was still young, barely entering his 20s, and we are very optimistic. And if you require additional evidence, in the Dungeon Train episode, Jake discovers a crystal ball that displays a potential future where Finn remains on the train, battling monsters. You see, the train is like an endless dungeon video game, and Finn loves it, so he wants to stay there forever. But Jake wants to leave. Towards the end of the episode, Finn sees the crystal ball again, and we see that in a possible future, Jake accompanied Finn until his old age. Finn looked almost the same as when he died, so that tells us that Jake has the potential to live to be around 70 or 80 human years old. Later in the episode, Finn decides that the right thing to do is to get off the train, and now the crystal ball shows Finn and Jake at home, washing dishes. So it seems like the crystal ball is telling the truth, and now we know that Jake can reach a very old age if he takes good care of himself. So it appears highly improbable that he passed away due to old age. However, there is an additional possibility. In the episode Jake the Child Star, Jake is taken by his alien dad to a faraway planet. Yeah, it's a long story, but basically Jake can stretch because his real dad is a shape-shifting alien. At the end of the episode, we find out that the alien was stealing his essence using some belts, basically stealing Jake's youth in order to live forever. Jake tricks the alien and swaps the belts, getting back his years of life. But it's possible that Jake may have lost more age than we noticed, and returned to Earth much older than before. So our number one cause of death for Jake is, effectively, aging, but quite premature, and as a consequence of the actions of the shape-shifting alien. Still, I don't think that's the definitive answer, because there are clear indications that it was something else. And no, I'm not talking about his freezing in hallucination. Personally, I think it's just a metaphor, because Jake has already been frozen and has survived without any problems. I'm talking rather about a little piece of the hallucination from Together Again that we haven't talked about. Just when Finn puts Jake in a cart and they head towards the library, Jake tells Finn that he's just holding him back and, very oddly, a strange sound is heard, and we see for just a second that a book falls on screen. The book is titled Mind Games, and it's written by JT What's Up Dawson. So it turns out that there has always been a theory about JT. Dawson is Jake's pen name when he was younger. And at this point it already seems confirmed, since in Jake's section on the U Mysteries, on the official Adventure Time channel, it is directly stated that JT Dawson is his alter ego. The book we know him for, Mind Games, has been appearing since the episode The Reign of the Gunters, and it is filled with tips on how to conquer girls, which Jake claims are detrimental and can manipulate your mind. Throughout several episodes in which they appear, we see that Finn and the Ice King mention several of the tips that the book gives, like flirting with all the girls to have the highest possible chance of getting a positive response from one of them, or being mysterious in front of all the girls to keep them interested and have options when a relationship ends. Clearly, it's a book full of tips on how to be a smooth-talking man, but these kinds of tips usually don't lead to healthy or genuine romantic relationships. It seems that Jake wrote Mind Games when he was younger and more flirtatious, but he has matured and realized that these tips are actually useless. That's why, in the context of the hallucination, Mind Games may symbolize Jake's poor advice or immaturity, and thus it was impeding Finn's growth. Maybe there came a point where Jake thought that Finn would be better off without him, even though we all know that's not true. But this doesn't offer context for his death, right? Just for the fact that he had already embraced his mortality. Well, this reminded me of another time when we get a little glimpse into the future of Adventure Time in the episode War of Cards of Parents and Daughters. Right in this episode we see how destructive Jake was in his youth and how he deals with the arrival of his fourth doggy decade of life. Meanwhile, Charlie joins her dad at a card war tournament, in exchange for him giving her a bone from his hand. To enhance a tarot reading of your own future, you must use the bone with a lock of your mom's hair for maximum effectiveness. She uses this to acquire decades of experience with a single vision, but something very interesting happens during the tarot reading. The initial two letters do not discuss her, but rather Jake. It is something that surprises Charlie herself, because as indicated by her, this is about her, not Jake. The first card is a bit difficult to decipher, because in a traditional tarot deck that design doesn't exist, but it seems to be a card of the lovers with snakes instead of people. In Adventure Time, the two intertwined snakes are actually the embodiment of the goddess of life, so it can possess a dual significance. The Lovers card symbolizes being 20 years old, and suddenly a Jake in his 20 dog years materializes. Charlie gets upset and puts down the second card that we're interested in, the Death Letter. In tarot, this card represents the age between 48 and 52 years old, and when placing this card, we see Jake in the process of suffocating while eating a sandwich, to which Charlie proceeds to mention that he is biting off more than he can chew, and that he needs to chew. So, did Jake die from choking? No, of course not. I believe Jake is one of the few characters who are unable to die by choking in Adventure Time. But the expression of biting off more than you can chew refers to doing things that you can no longer achieve. Basically, it's like throwing yourself into situations that are way beyond your abilities. And this strangely appears when Charlie puts the death letter. Now, obviously Charlie was just outlining his life before receiving the rest of the visions, putting the card of life first, then the card of death, but unintentionally gave us a glimpse into Jake's life. Besides, it's pretty convenient that the death letter shows us Jake at 20 years old, which is the age we estimate he was in real years when he died, and which also tends to represent the age between 48 and 52, which is the age we estimate he was in dog years at the time of his death. Personally, I believe that the vision has two possible interpretations, and they give us the last two real possibilities for Jake's death. One possibility is that it's something he brought upon himself, trying to do something beyond his abilities, like stretching himself too thin or something like that. But the other one is that it's directly related to food, and that's the theory that convinces me the most. You'll notice that food is a constant symbol for Jake's death, first with the sandwich and then with the 50 flavors ice cream. Well, we have seen that Jake consumes ice cream and chocolate cake multiple times throughout the series, and it is something he mentions himself that chocolate is potentially toxic, that it could be lethal for him, although clearly he does not care. The interesting thing is that theobromine, the poisonous part of chocolate, is only lethal to dogs in extremely large amounts, but it can build up in the dog's body over time. So in theory, if Jake became accustomed to regularly consuming small portions of chocolate and disregarded other symptoms like thirst or a rapid heartbeat, it was just a question of time or a higher than usual dose to cause him to die from a heart attack after several days in a weakened state. Jake reassured Finn not to worry, explaining that his time had already arrived and that this was the natural order of things. Everything most likely thanks to a huge ice cream that he desired to eat, attempting to take on more than he could handle, quite literally. In the end, death is just as natural as life, and it's something Jake was able to accept even when Finn became obsessed with an impossible ideal. Something strange about Together Again is that we don't see any new relationships for Finn after his 20 years, almost as if he got stuck and, as he says, waiting deep down for the day he could see Jake again. The point of Adventure Time is that everything changes, yes or yes, and that change is a reality in our lives. The point of this final episode, Beyond a Triumphant Return, is to see Finn finally accept that unchanging reality and decide to be reborn and live a full life without Jake, and wait to see him again when he returns to the world of the dead. Even though that did not stop Jake from regretting and starting a new life once again with his brother Finn, finally being together again. So I hope you liked this video. Like, if it was like that, subscribe for more videos like this, and they'll probably be less depressing. Remember to comment on the mysteries you'd like to see solved, whether from TV shows or video games, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.